All right. Today with us, we have Alex Capecelatro from Josh.ai. Alex, thanks for being with us. There is a ton of interest now in ChatGPT and all of this kind of new movement towards AI. And I know it's something you've been playing with. So give us a little bit of background real quickly, just the 30 seconds on Josh.ai and kind of what you have done and how it compares to your competition out there.
Thanks, appreciate it. It's always great to be here. So for those who don't know, Josh.ai is a privacy-focused home automation system with our own proprietary voice engine. So you can ask Josh to turn on the lights, open the shades, play music. Really great natural voice control when it comes to the home. That being said, Josh was never built to do all of the open-ended questions that something like a Google Assistant or an Alexa could do. But now with ChatGPT, which is a product built by a company, OpenAI, we have a deep integration. And with Josh, you can ask for almost anything. I mean, I was playing around earlier asking for questions like, why is the state California named California? And can you give me some great recommendations on sushi restaurants for vegetarians in San Francisco? It turns out that with the ChatGPT integration built into Josh, you can now use voice commands to ask for literally anything. And when I say anything, you can have it write songs, tell you stories, answer questions. You can even ask questions that are very involved. Like you can say, how many boxes of Pop-Tarts would fit in the trunk of my Tesla? And Josh is able to, using the ChatGPT engine, figure out what's the volume of a box of Pop-Tarts, what's the volume of the trunk of a Tesla, do the math, and basically help figure out, oh, you can probably get, X number of boxes in your trunk. You can ask it so many open-ended questions. So we're extremely excited. I mean, this is a crazy cool time for this.
So are we saying that as well as having Josh AI, turn on my lights, and the thing I always loved about Josh AI as an idea was that, if you've got a house with a lot of shades or a lot of lights, asking, your favorite tool to turn on your lights is a fairly meaningless thing. And the ability of Josh to sort of interpret when you meant lounge, you meant living room or whatever, I think that was great. I think that's distinguished. But I know some people said to us, well, I still have an Amazon Echo or an Amazon Alexa or whatever they are, because I still have to ask, do me a timer. What's the weather like outside? Because, I can't look out the window. Could I combine all of that into Josh AI now?
The short answer is yes for the examples you gave, but there are always more. So Josh can already do timers. You can broadcast intercom messages between the house. You can say, announce everywhere it's time for dinner. You can ask about the weather. You can ask about all sorts of things from Josh. That being said, there are going to be things that Alexa does differently, like optimizations for purchasing products. There's certain things that other assistants would do differently. With Josh, first and foremost, we're focused on privacy and home control. So if you want the easiest way to walk in a room and give a command like turn on the lights, open the shades, play the Beatles, watch the news, we make all of that work easier than anyone. But now with ChatGPT, what we're able to do is basically extend the knowledge base. So if you have a question, how many stars are in the universe, or what's the capital of Peru, all of those types of questions, in the past, we were not the best at answering those. And now we don't just do as well as Google and Amazon, we're currently doing better than they're doing, which is really exciting for us.
I think for our industry, that's really unique. And you and I talked about this a little bit, but how do you think that's going to revolutionize what we're doing as an industry? Because this really feels like one of the first times where we're well ahead of the game on technology, not kind of trailing behind, but making it more reliable and more robust. Do you see this as being like one of the first places where kind of the leading edge of a new technology?
Yeah, so there are really at least three different categories of innovation that we think these generative models like ChatGPT are enabling. And I'm sure there are many more that we haven't even thought about, but basically the three categories of things that we're focused on. One is how do we make home control even better? And I'll explain that in a second. The second one are these general purpose questions where you just want to know facts, and that's what we just talked about. And then the third one are basically how do we make the underlying system more robust and more natural? So I'll kind of talk about that one first, and then I'll get into home control. So right now, the way that voice control builds into these systems, and they're different with Siri and Alexa and Google, everything's a little bit different. But on the Josh side, we basically have an understanding of the architecture of the home. So we might know, for example, that the house is at 123 Main Street in Brooklyn, New York. We might know that it has 3 stories. On the first story, you have a kitchen, a dining room, an office. On the second story, maybe a primary bedroom with a bathroom and a closet, maybe a guest room that also has a bathroom and a closet. And based on that architecture, which of course also involves devices, so some devices or some locations have lights, some have shades, some have music, some have thermostats. All of that creates the construct for you to say something like, turn on the lights. And it just works where you are, or turn on the lights upstairs, or turn on the lights in the whole home. That architecture has existed in the Josh system for a while. And by understanding the system and the architecture and the way that these devices are laid out, we can then get a little bit smarter. So for example, if you have a room that's called the gym, maybe you set it up with your programming initially in Lutron or Crestron or Control 4, most voice assistants will say, oh, you have to specifically say, turn on the lights in the gym to make that work. Well, we've been smarter for a long time saying, we know that some people will call the gym the fitness room, the exercise room, the workout room. That's going to work by itself. But you still need to be fairly constrained in what you say. You need to say, turn on the lights in and give it a location. Well, one of the ways that
we have a, I was going to say, sorry interrupting, we have a game in my family which is can remember how to describe the shade over the door to the balcony, because whoever did it, there's 14 words in it, and we never quite get the combination in the right sequence. So maybe we need a Josh system.
No, that's right. And that's what we're trying to fight against is we want to enable natural speaking. So the first thing is we already are able to say, we know that the gym might be called the fitness room or the workout room. And we know the same thing about lots of other rooms as well. What ChatGPT is enabling is for us to build a model that's a lot more open-ended. So for example, we're early in testing, this is still in development, but you can give a question or give a command that's along the lines of much more of a conversational element. So it might be something like, hey, we're going to be making dinner in an hour. Can you make sure that it's light enough to cook a meal? Well, we can figure out that you cook a meal in the kitchen using the ChatGPT natural language processing so that you don't have to remember the name of the room. You don't have to give very precise commands. You can speak in a much more open-ended way. So that ability to really extend the system is very exciting. I think the open-ended questions and general knowledge graph is exciting. And then the other thing that we're doing is we're basically extending the way that you would effectively match different words. So for example, oftentimes you'll name a room after a kid. So maybe Sophie's room or Gerald's room, but the spelling might not exactly match the way the microphone's going to hear. These are often phoneme related problems. So basically the sounds and the parts of speech.
Sure.
And so what we're able to do is actually use ChatGPT a little bit in reverse, where we say, we know ahead of time, so kind of pre-processing the name of the room. So let's go with Sophie's room. We can use ChatGPT to basically say, hey, break this name Sophie's room into the phonemes and then give us 10 similar sounding other names or other spellings and have that basically create a larger dictionary in the back end. So now when someone says, turn on the lights in Sophie's room, we're going to capture a larger array of things that it might hear. Because look, microphones are not perfect. If you've used Josh or Alexa or Siri or Google, you're used to things being slightly misinterpreted. We already make a lot of corrections for common words. So for example, when someone says open the drapes, we know that sometimes a microphone hears open the grapes and we do the right thing. We do this for thousands of things, but it doesn't capture everything. We're starting to use ChatGPT to capture millions of mishearings so that we do the right thing if you get close. That being said, I do want to just bring up ChatGPT is not perfect. If you've seen the headlines, Google had this big disaster with their version of Bard, where they basically were showing a question about the James Space Satellite or telescope or something. It got the facts a little bit wrong. And the reality is these generative models will make stuff up sometimes, and we need to be very careful with that. So one of the reasons that we're going through a beta program and doing an extensive testing is we don't want you to accidentally have your lights turn on when they shouldn't, or have your thermostat go to 0 degrees when you don't want that to happen. we're being very cautious about when and how ChatGPT gets introduced to make sure that the environment is safe, it's not going to do the wrong thing, and also to make sure that your privacy continues to be protected. That being said, early testing, we're beginning to see that we can put safeguards on these systems in ways that are extremely reliable, with one exception. And the exception that I think is really interesting, which will get better, but the exception that we're finding is when you ask for certain information. For example, I asked ChatGPT through Josh, what are some museums in California that feature artwork by Andy Warhol? It gave me a very confident sounding response, and it was exciting that it told me these are places where I can see this. But then I started doing some research and realized, ooh, those weren't always right. Or maybe they had Andy Warhol in a temporary exhibit in 2005, but it's not currently there anymore. These are areas that we need to be a little bit cautious because generative models will make stuff up if we're not careful.
Yeah,
That's it.
a friend of mine was very kind enough to chat GPT me rather than I guess Google me, and he's an AI fiend, and he sent it to me. He said, "This is really good," and I went, "Yes, except half of it's not true." Now, the half that wasn't true, I might like to have been true, but actually wasn't true because I hadn't written the book on programming that it credited me to. So, and I know some of that is always going to be the way. How much when a user uses it, how much are they going to know it's Josh, and how much are they going to know it's ChatGPT? I mean, how does a user know which one is answering?
At the end of the day, the user shouldn't care if the response gives them what they want. So if you say, what's the weather in Alaska? Right now, Josh will give that response because ChatGPT doesn't do weather and we do weather quite well. If, on the other hand, you said, what's the capital of Alaska? We might go to ChatGPT to get that response. The user doesn't really care of the source as long as the response is good. That being said, because of the fact that sometimes the information can be questionable, we might add a little disclaimer at times that say, according to ChatGPT, here are museums that have Andy Warhol in California. Maybe ChatGPT is wrong. We're going to have to be very careful about how we introduce facts and information. But when it comes to someone just asking a question and wanting a response, our goal is to give you the right response quickly, and you don't really care where it comes from. And to give a little insight, this is no different than how we currently do stock prices, weather information, and lots of other data queries that we go out to. You don't really care that we got the stock price from this certain index versus another, as long as it's accurate. If we give you the wrong data, that's when it's a problem. And that's why we're going to go through a lot of testing and a lot of just early beta feedback studies to find out from people, hey, is this working? Is this accurate? Are you being told the wrong thing? And one example of what we've already fixed, but where this goes awry, if you say, turn on the lights, we know that that should go to Josh and Josh should take care of that. But if you say, what's the definition of the word lights? Well, ChatGPT could give you that definition. It's very tricky to figure out when do we send things to them versus when do we answer it directly. And one of the examples that came up was we had someone staying at my house where we have these shades covering the skylights. So they're really cool because you can have the shades open or closed to get, light coming in. Well, those skylights are not yet on the Josh system. They're basically more of a manual type of process. So we had a guest who said, turn on the lights, open the main shades. But then they said, open the ceiling shades. Well, this is early testing. This is not yet launched. Josh figured out it doesn't know ceiling shades, so it passed to ChatGPT. And ChatGPT then responded saying, oh, to open ceiling shades, get a ladder, climb up the ladder, open the hatch, made up this whole response. And so we have now made it so ChatGPT cannot respond to turn on, open, smart home related commands, because we don't want a generative response telling you how to turn something on that might not actually be safe or accurate.
You don't you don't want it sending clients to the breaker box to rewire something.
How nervous should we be of the security end of this? So, I know of a client situation where the client was I'll try and make this as bland as I can, an employee of a large company that sells smart speakers. And they were told by their own IT department they weren't allowed them in the house because they didn't trust them, which wasn't an ironic thing, I thought. So one of the nice things about Josh is so much is done sort of in the system without going to the cloud. The moment it goes to goes out to find one of these AI models, it's going into the cloud. So how comfortable should I feel with the security of that someone now can't track what I'm asking ChatGPT through, Josh?
It's a great question, and it was probably the first thing that we started thinking about as we were incorporating ChatGPT. So the first thing to think about is we already do have a cloud component. People might not realize, but there's no way to get weather information, stock information, stream Netflix or Spotify, music or shows without going to the cloud in some capacity. And we do that right now by sending commands locally from the device in the home, protected and encrypted to the Josh cloud. And then the Josh cloud basically sends an anonymized request out to some third party. So for example, if you're sitting in your home, let's say you're in Miami, Florida, and you say, "What's the weather?" That goes to the Josh cloud over an encrypted method. Josh then sends to the weather API, "Hey, we need the weather for this location." They don't know who asked it. They don't know where it came from. They don't know any data. That comes back to the Josh cloud, and then the Josh cloud routes that back to Josh locally. ChatGPT is going to be working in a very similar way. The plan is we don't need to know that it's Nigel or Keith or Alex asking a question for almost everything that comes up. That being said, you do want to be able to ask some questions that have context. So for example, I might want to say, what are some good hiking trails nearby? So what we've done on the Josh side is we've said, if the word nearby or any series of words that are related to your location come up, we'll actually bundle the location with the request. So instead of ChatGPT's API getting what are some hikes nearby and having to guess at what your location is, ChatGPT gets to request what are hikes near, and then we put your current location based on your Josh system. So we do anonymize the data, but we're using some information to make the information better. So you can ask, what are some good coffee shops or what are good restaurants that are suitable for vegans that are open after 10 p.m.? We can get you all of that without having to invade your privacy. But we're also aware that some people don't even want that data to go out. And so the current plan is that ChatGPT will be an option that you can enable or disable. I just assume 99% of people will enable it because of how amazing the experience is going to be.
Yeah. So it seems really great how it's going to affect the way we live in our homes with it. I just kind of want to ask you a bigger picture about how you see these generative models changing the world around us. Like, as you said, they still are mistake prone. I asked it to help me write a blog, and it said that invisible speakers are really easy because you just put them behind the wall, but they're actually the hardest one to install. So I thought it was funny that it's still guessing, as you said. But what is going to have to change to make this go from a really cool toy or a cool tool to something that is world changing? And what do you think that's going to look like?
I believe it's already world changing today. And I don't think there's a future of voice control or many other aspects of just work and interaction that won't be influenced by this. We look at Microsoft putting over $10 billion to put ChatGPT into Bing. Google's looking at doing something similar. Facebook has announced a huge investment. Spotify and Snapchat and many others are incorporating this. I think what we're finding is this technology is already making people's lives better today, but it's also moving at a very rapid pace towards getting better. So most of people's experiences with ChatGPT now are using the GPT 3.5 model, which was trained on about 175 billion parameters. The model's great, but it only has data that goes up to 2021, and it's limited in other ways. The 4.0 GPT model is rumored to be coming out sometime in the next few months. The CEO of OpenAI has publicly said, we're worried that people are overhyping the capabilities. It will be better, but it's still not going to be perfect. What I think about is the rate of innovation. We're going to have GPT-4, GPT-5, GPT-6. It might take, a year, 2 years, 3 years to get some of these edge cases perfectly refined, but it's still amazing what it can do today. And so I don't look at it as a toy. I look at a lot of other technology as too early. I think VR is too early. A lot of AR is too early. I think what Meta is doing with the metaverse is a little bit too early. But when it comes to generative AI for language processing, this is not future technology. This is today technology. And honestly, it's why I'm so excited about it right now.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing. The question I know more cynical people is, am I going to have to pay for this? I mean, is this what's the model look like? I mean, Chat GPT is interesting because mostly it's free. That's okay because it's half wrong half the time. As it gets more accurate, do you see people with Josh having to pay per request? Is it how does it work for a client money wise?
So the way that Josh was introduced today, pre-ChatGPT, there's a hardware cost. So if you want 5, 10, 20 microphones, you're going to be, buying the number of units you need. Then there's also a platform access cost, which basically gives you access to the platform. So all the security, the apps, the software. The current plan is that ChatGPT is just part of that system. It's not an extra add-on. It's not, a per request type fee. That being said, it is early, and I think there are a lot of unknowns. I want to mention, though, that when people talk about ChatGPT, they don't always realize that there are many alternatives to that one company's offering. So
Mm-hmm.
OpenAI has ChatGPT. ChatGPT is really the popular model that's made most of us aware. But there are already about 5 or 6 other competitors. They're open source models, they're free models. And so they all have their pros and cons. The nice thing about the open source models is, in addition to being free, we can really train them on the data that we already have. So we can make them, much better at certain things. The nice thing about the models that are not open source, though, they're feeding in data from Google and Bing and, more real-time information. So, a fun fact that popped up a few weeks ago was after the Super Bowl, someone had asked ChatGPT via Bing, who won the Super Bowl, and the Super Bowl or the response very confidently gave the wrong answer, and basically asserted, I think the Eagles lost. Is that right? So I think it asserted the Eagles had won, which was totally wrong. And I only bring this up because I think there's value in real-time data. There's value in making sure you can answer what happened today, what happened this hour, what happened this minute. That being said, a lot of requests don't need real-time data. And so there are ways to basically throttle. So if you're asking to turn on your lights, you're asking for the time, you don't have to go out to an expensive API request. Long story short, I don't know how those super low-cost assistants like Amazon and Google might handle this, but in the Josh case, it's basically already built into the pricing model. We don't anticipate anything having to change.
In our house, we have an easterly facing window and we have it automated so the shades go up and go down. And they go down at sort of at sunrise. Now, if it's cloudy, we'd really like them not to go down. But if it's sunny, so do you think we'll ever get to the point where we can get smart enough to say, hey, if it's sunny today, lower the shades. If it's not sunny, leave them up until 2 o'clock or something. I mean, are we going to be able to concatenate requests into this?
We have been doing this long before ChatGPT was ever a thing. And I'll explain briefly the way that we do it and why it's really exciting. And I love that example. So we have a bunch of IP and patents around a concept that we call natural language programming. And this is basically writing programming just using natural language sentences. We then applied that to the way that we create scenes. I think some systems call them routines or automations. And so a scene would be any type of, trigger. So good morning could be a scene. When you say good morning or you have it run on a certain time, that scene can be set to open the shades, turn on lights, play music, whatever you want. What Josh does, and this is part of sort of an umbrella technology that we call home intelligence, is it allows you to add natural language conditionals. So the one that I have at home that I really like is I have a scene called movie time. Now, I never give the command movie time. This is a scene that is set to trigger anytime the TV turns on. So if I pick up a remote or if I turn on the TV through any other means, it tells this scene to trigger. The scene then says, if it's sunny outside, and basically if it's after sunrise and before sunset, then close the shades so that the TV doesn't get glare. But if it's cloudy outside or if it's after sunset or before sunrise, so we know that there's no sun coming in, it just ignores the shades. It doesn't do anything. The net result is You walk in, you grab the remote, you turn on the TV. You don't even have to think. The house is deciding, do I close the shade or not, based on what's going to make your viewing experience the best. We do that today. We've done that for a while. And it's some of the best aspects when people dive into Josh programming. You can do this around thermostats and fans and lights and shades. And we even have artwork. You can trigger it based on motion sensors and all sorts of things. So you can say, if it's a weekday or a weekend, if the weather's a certain way, if the temperature's a certain way, if the trigger, in this room gets activated, have it do something entirely based on what the conditions that you set are. So it's very exciting, exactly for the reason that you described. And it's not something that will be enabled. It's something that already is enabled.
That's actually great. And it's way less focused on the capabilities of the programmer and more just focused on what do you want to happen? Like, how do you want to live? Just tell us. I love that. All right, Alex, this is incredibly exciting. I love seeing what Josh is doing. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate the time.
Of course. Thank you, guys. Super exciting times.